Forgetting is the curse of the man-thing, and sometimes his only blessing. But I haven't forgotten the man-thing. He may be a character you say haunts you. It's those stories. Man-thing is the rarest sort of protagonist in that he is chiefly an unobserved observer until he tries to intervene and scares the carp out of the water. In 1971, the Man-Thing debuted in a Marvel Comics experiment with adult material in the form of black and white magazines. Savage Tales, #1, features the ill fate of chemist Ted Sallis, betrayed by his lover, Eleanor, into the hands of terrorists who want his secret, the new super soldier formula, in the manner of that which once transformed Private Steve Rogers into the apex of human fitness, Captain America. But something there in the swamp works with this imperfect formula to render Sallis senseless, recreated as a shambling, muck-based mockery of humanity. I don't think progress made it so far as its promise, but now influences such as phantasmagoric modern theater, postmodernism, and especially in Gerber's case, existentialism, were suffusing even pop culture consciousness. Comics, reflecting the male predominance of his audience, as romance genre titles fell out of favor, were certainly tardy in developing and crediting female writers. There is an element, however inconsistent, of progress, the maturity of expanding viewpoints in the name of more challenging but fun entertainment in this era of new journalism and baby boomer commercialized counterculture that is the early and mid-1970s. The experiment didn't continue long, but The Man-Thing, created by Jerry Conway and Gray Morrow, came back a couple of years later as new material for the reprint anthology Adventures into Fear. But as new material, you see, with issue number 10, the title began featuring Man-Thing in new stories, including one racially tense story of convicts on the run in the Everglades that was drawn by Jim Starlin, the creator of Thanos. From number 11 on, the next years nearly always saw Man-Thing written by the same writer, Steve Gerber. A horror comics fad took off that year, continuing with strong sales for a couple more years before abating during 1975. Man-Thing's writing, with terrific art by Val Merrick, gained a following in Adventures to Fear, and Man-Thing became a sort of mascot as an original creation for the Marvel horror publications. A few bi-monthly issues of Fear, and Marvel crossed over Fear 19 into the premiere of Man-Thing #1 in 1974. That's also the storyline that introduces a very incidental character named Howard the Duck. I think the character Man-Thing really gets swinging by the time he gets his own series, and no one issue really sets the tone for what you'll always get, for sure. If you want to read this stuff, I'd go in expecting something off-kilter and different. I don't think the covers were always very much help telling you what's really inside. You've got 3 basic divisions. You've got #1, issues with Jennifer Kale, sword and sorcery stuff. #2, Richard Rory issues, always character studies. And #3, the masks that are unsortable by supporting characters, and they're always different. So, you don't build a long-term narrative, frankly, about Ted Sallis or the Man-Thing. That character's status quo doesn't actually change much. He's bonded for a little while to both of those supporting characters, Jennifer and Richard. But that's it. Now, I think if you take any 3 issues of the series and look at them, you'll know if you really want to read any more. I'm dearly fond of the Fool Killer stories in Man-Thing #3 and 4. Macabre. This is where Richard Rory joins as a series regular, stranded in the Everglades. He briefly begins a romance, even finds work. The evangelical-inspired Fool Killer is actually looking to murder Ted Sallis, as well as land developer F.A. Scheist. The giant-sized Man-Thing title is always good, but the payoff for Jennifer as a sorceress in Giant Size #3 drawn by Alfredo Alcala, is maybe Alcala, sorry, is maybe best when enjoyed later. It's top-notch. Jennifer's the main human character in most of the Adventure into Fear stories, issues 10 through 19. She doesn't turn up so much in the main title, if at all, outside of that giant-sized story. A teenager, especially a young woman, was a decidedly modern choice after a decade of macho Marvel heroes. I really love the Citrusville censorship stories, too. It seems so absurd and unreasonable. Then you put down your comic book, turn on some news, and now you do know ridiculous. So those stories are in issues 17, 18, around there. I want to include the Disgusting Star Spangler issue, number 16, parodying the dystopian rockers of the day, especially that Diamond Dog / Aladdin Sane era Bowie persona with its futuristic despair and inescapable decadence. It sets up the Mad Viking, a nickname for the ultra-macho old dock worker, Jorgensen, who decides to pick up a battle axe and start showing the world what strength and manhood means again. He starts with murdering his granddaughter Astrid's boyfriend. He's a big hit with the Citrusville mob, though. I know others will proffer the Ghost Clown play two-parter in issues 5 and 6, or that sad giant-size story about bullied Edmund in giant size 4, but I like these three storylines and characters best. The ones with the Fool Killer and the Citrusville book burning stories, and the last one with Jennifer and Dakim the Enchanter. Oh, I should mention Dakim the Enchanter. Dakim the Enchanter, well, they say that Dakim's name is derived from his friend David Anthony Kraft's nickname Dak. And I remember talking to David about that. And that's where I'll leave that story for now, because it's not entirely crystal clear in my mind. I remember looking at the timeline and all that. But speaking of Dak, David Anthony Kraft wrote 2 issues of She-Hulk in 1980 that revisit the grounds of Scheist's demise. It wasn't the Fool Killer that got him. It was the enigmatic La Hacienda, the location of the actual Fountain of Youth. And those are She-Hulk issues 7 and 8, which also have the Man-Thing. And those come out in 1980. The issue about the advertising copywriter who's losing his mind in issue 12 was drawn by John Buscema, and it was a great match. And it has a mini-series called The Infernal Man-Thing that was released around 2012. So those are a few, often cited, and then there's the ones with Dog, also feature the end of the brief and brilliant run by artist Mike Plug. I actually prefer issue 15, the one where Man-Thing only appears as a candle for St. Cloud. It's a strange favorite, and not where I'd send a new reader curious about the quality of 70s horror comics. Yes, I'd say you'd find the quality. The story is actually quite good. It's not a good place to judge what a Man-Thing story would be like. It's a story about the values of the establishment and the anti-establishment embodied in this sad romance featuring the young artist St. Cloud's flashback to her time with a government scientist named, of course, Ted Sallis. Well, that's all you really need to know. You'll find just 25 issues. Make that 22 issues. Man-Thing, and there have been other efforts to bring him back, and hence he'll join the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but those, for me, are the money. Add in 5 issues of giant-sized Man-Thing, then if you're a completist, there's 9 issues of Fear, character studies mostly, not overly necessary to enjoying the series afterwards narrative-wise, and anything you want after that might be your cup of tea, maybe not. But while they are unrepentantly weird, I find those stories to be relevant to understanding counterculture of the day, which was quite an achievement in so stodgy a field as comic books. But fortunately, it was also low paying, attracting hungry young talents who created the majority of the stories that are actually adapted today from movies that predominate much of contemporary youth culture. I think everyone involved deserves a fat cut, along with those lovely movie tickets and flights out to Hollywood. I would truly love to see someone work true to the original Man Thing scripts and settings because it's one of the first comic book series that's written in the tone of modern sensibilities. Hollywood wasn't ready for imperial adventurous and corporate guard dog Iron Man as he was written throughout his first years, but the youngsters like Gerber, a decade later, were writing characters with creativity and a vested interest in observing the emergent consciousness of the day. You know. So the original Iron Man, that wouldn't have flown at the theater. I think you get to see who that guy was just at the beginning of the movie, really. And then RDJ Jr. took him in a very different direction. So in the letters page, Steve Gerber, right, his optimism shines through. And though his stories often flirt with bleakness in a way that reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut, he's just as wryly humorous as Vonnegut. I enjoy the way art and sequential storytelling works together when paired with distinct captioning and lifelike insights in place of, say, character types borrowed broadly from outdated comedies or lifted poorly from movies. There's a bit of a B-movie trashiness to Marvel horror, but Gerber puts more care and genuine respect into his female characters. Most like Ruth, for example. You can find in my Integrated Fix blogs, just try taking a look for Ruth Hart, H-A-R-T. And I like that character a lot. We meet her as a member of a biker gang who's accused of stealing from them. And she becomes friends with Richard Rory in a very desperate situation. By the way, that's also that Fool Killer story I was talking about. Ruth Hart. Interesting character. She ends up becoming a nurse in another series. And I would love to talk about Omega the Unknown someday. But I've already referenced just as an example how much the old guard of writing would have given you something, well, outside of Spider-Man, well, that wouldn't exactly be like modern sensibilities. What the hey, it's comic books, but we love comic books, right? I was talking about Gerber and his female characters. Let's talk about the verity in his everyman characters. You know, his everyday people sound like people instead of something cribbed off of a TV show. It's nice. And frankly, Gerber has a very stout vocabulary, too. Now, some of the actual story ideas were more workable than others, yes, but there's a refreshing, if occasionally angsty, mode that persists until his unusual exit with the last issue of Man Thing, number 25. I also think Jim Mooney, a more traditional comic book artist but a clear storyteller, did an admirable job with Steve's scripts. I don't think that's so apparent in the superhero fare, cranked out largely in imitation of the formulae overseen by Stan Lee. But the themes of Man Thing are carried by a more crisp and realistic dialogue and new ideas about the transgressive figures and problems that inform the narratives. And from there, I think many a poetic tale was told. Thanks for listening. This was Creative Marvels. I'm your host, Cecil. We'll tune in again before too long. I'll see you then.